to move freely,
yes,
and to have many different voices in a way that perhaps had you remained in India you would not have had.
Not only if I had remained in India, but if I had been sent to school, say Oxford University or Cambridge University, which was the normal route for me to have taken, I would again have felt imprisoned in the correct grammatical sentence constructions of British English that I had been taught to revere and always ace my tests in. You know, that colonial hangover of looking down, until recently, looking down on Anglophone writing from non-white Britons, would somehow have colored my way of thinking. Whereas coming to the United States and making it my home, accidental immigrant though I am, it meant suddenly all the what's my turf was something for me to grab and find. What language, what format for the novel. This was all pioneer material. And it wasn't, you know, American models, it wasn't Indian Hindu models, but I could take what I needed from whichever, including from art. Mughal miniature painting of the 17th century is very influential in how I structure.
Well, I wanted to, I'm glad you bring that up, because The Tree Bride, which I just finished, struck me as being a kind of mosaic, or, I mean, I don't know what you would, I would like you to talk about the structure of that book and tell me about
I
what
will,
went
but
into
let me
that.
get back to the evolution.
Okay.
So the beginning part, like Jasmine, the discourse in America and my personal discourse about who am I, immigrant, expatriate, citizen of another country, exile, all this was you're either here or you are there. You're either fully, you know, you're choosing to let go some of your cultural origins and you're adopting some new ones. All right, so Jasmine, the novel, was very much, some of the characters in Middleman, they're open to America and they feel that it has to be at the expense of the origins, right? And I have talked about it because I felt this and still feel this in myself, that making oneself over as an American requires a kind of murder of the self, a slaughter of the old self, that there's nothing benevolent or painless about that transformation.
So do you really believe that there is a kind of murder? Or have you for yourself in terms of becoming an American?
Yes, that you are becoming someone else if you're honest with yourself. And if you're not thinking that I'm going to straddle the fence and I've got my, you know, home in India and I've got my $1 million home in
Is that
Silicon
why
Valley.
you have written against the notion of the hyphenated American? Because you believe that you have to, in some sense, murder that previous self to become an American?
I've written against, spoken very forcefully against hyphenization for a couple of reasons. The first is that
we should clarify that and say you do not consider yourself an Indian American writer. You consider yourself an American
writer, and that my aim is to expand the center rather than create this little grid of people, white people or African American writers in the center and everyone else on the periphery. So I felt that since not every American writer, like say a John Updike or a Toni Morrison or a Susan Minot, to pick a young example, are not routinely identified as Anglo-American or German-American or Irish-American, but just as another writer, American writer. But when it comes to an Amy Tan, even though she's third generation and she's Christian and, you know, her Chinese is not her first language, or a Jessica Hagedorn, or a Maxine Hong Kingston, people who grew up here, who are not immigrants into this country, are almost always hyphenated. So I felt that this was a kind of racist impulse, unconsciously racist impulse, and that I was trying to sensitize people into seeing that you've got to treat all of us equally well. Let me choose the way I want myself to be described. And with some groups, like African Americans, it's empowering to grab the hyphenization, whereas for some other later immigrant groups, it's a kind of marginalization. So it was speaking to the establishment American rather than speaking to other minorities.
So you're not saying if somebody wants to do it, that's fine. You're saying for yourself, you do not
for
want
myself
to be
and know why
yeah.
these labels are being slapped on you by somebody else. I want to do the choosing.
Partially, it's a marketing thing, isn't it?
As a writer, it wasn't then. And you know, I'm a pioneer again in the sense of having had to create body by body an audience for characters who've come not from Italy, not from say Latin America, Mexico, but from South Asia. And in the beginning, editors at Viking Penguin and other big publishers, I shouldn't name the publishers, but in any case, would say, you're a wonderful writer. We haven't read a book of stories like this, but we can't sell it. Like if you're from India, if you have an Indian name and looks, you better get into your best sari, put on your traditional gold, and write about the kind of
past,
yes,
or about your life
or
there.
Raj, British Raj, because we can only market it to old India hands. And that's where I had to be kind of stubborn, yes, and say, no, this is what I want to do, and I've got big stories to tell. And now, as we said
before, there seems to be a whole trend of this, and it's become quite popular. So,
but within this group of naturalized Americans or second-generation Americans with Asian origin, let's say, the majority still write about the world that they've left behind or the world that their parents left behind and that they haven't seen.
Yeah.
And it's only a few of us who are saying, we're here to stay.
Right.
Don't forget it. And that we've got big stories to tell.
Well, now we can get to The Tree Bride, because there it does seem to me you're doing both.
Yes.
I mean, you are talking about if you have a protagonist who's a very contemporary American person, but she has a heritage in India, and she discovers it, pieces it together. There's a spiritual quality to the book, and there's also a very contemporary quality.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about the making of that book, which is, I think it's a complicated book. It must have been hard to write, I would imagine.
It's a complicated idea, and I thought I was going to write only one novel, Desirable Daughters. I had no idea when I started that novel that it would end up as a trilogy of 3 standalone novels. And what I had wanted to get across in fiction was the communobiography. Like, I am one of 3 sisters, as is Tara Chatterjee, the narrator of Desirable Daughters. And we come from an extinct class in Calcutta, now called Kolkata. And I wanted to get that sense of 3 overprotected daughters from a privileged family who are sent, who find themselves in the States as we did for whatever reason, and then who have made very, very separate choices about what is home, where do we want to live. And I knew that I wasn't ready to write it as nonfiction, as the biography of the 3 sisters. So I had to create 3 sisters as characters who could get across the ideas and then have their own adventures. So the oldest of the 3 sisters replicates, as do many South Asian immigrants here, an India that no longer exists in India, an old-fashioned, tradition-bound India in places like Queens, New York, or towns in New Jersey. And the middle one among the sisters says, I can't handle the rulelessness. I've defied my parents by marrying a Bengali Brahmin of my own choice. I'm going to go back and be the corporate modern wife in Bombay, now called Mumbai. And so her battles are, as is in the case of my own sister, how to be both a PhD with a job and at the same time a good corporate wife for a man who has many responsibilities.
Okay.
And the third sister, I have, echoing my impulses, who says, all right, I've been protected for a long time, now I've got to try out. I'm American, let me have my adventures, and who gets into a lot of scrapes as she tries to find herself. But when I wrote that last chapter of the novel Desirable Daughters, in which she goes back to the homeland, meaning the ancestral village, which she hadn't seen, which I hadn't seen until I was doing research for Desirable Daughters.
This is your own ancestral village?
My own ancestral village, though I've changed the name and location a little. And she has this hallucinatory experience of being in the midst of colonial politics, and she sees the ancestor after whom she had been named, her namesake. I said, oh my God, in order to know who I am, why I feel American, why I needed to escape, etc., I have to now find out what shaped me. And so the next novel, The Tree Bride, is a very American form, meaning it's a roots search.
Yes.
Only when a South Asian like me does a roots search, it's not about finding out what village my family left or who my ancestors were. I know all that only too well, and often it's quite stifling about identity. But it was a matter of discovering for myself, through a lot of research, how colonial history has shaped me, and how the nationalist struggle affected my family. That if my relatives, some of them were very, very conservative, it wasn't because they were being super Hindu, but they were being super Hindu in maintenance of rituals in order to fight the British who wanted, westernization.
To usurp them, yes.
Yes, and that they wanted to educate people just enough in English so that they would be good paper pushers. They would be scribes, and that they would be discontented.
And so your family was resisting that?
My father's side of the family, yes.
I see. And
yes,
you were digging up that part of your own background.
Yeah, and understanding the whole history of that region.
That's fascinating.
Yes, and a lot of the nationalist struggle came from my home state.
So in that book, you do deal with the whole nationalist struggle for India. Now, what will the third...
And the other thing that I had to come up and be very honest about is I have a scene towards the end in which Tara, the very modern San Franciscan Californian narrator, is visited by the ghost of her ancestor namesake Taralata in San Francisco. And like her, I've been visited by ghosts, but I live in two worlds. As a Hindu American, I believe in you can go as far, you can try to go as far as your dream and your gumption will take you. But at the same time, there are many realities, visible and invisible, and that invisible world of ghosts is very much mine.
Well, I want to thank you for describing that. I had wanted to ask you about the third book. We don't have time for that. It will, I assume, be out one one days.
Yes.
Can you give us
I've just delivered it,
fall
okay,
2006.
So
sooner than I thought.
And it's called Bangalore by the Bay. Bangalore is a concept for outsourcing.
Oh, okay. Well, I look forward to reading it, and that will complete then the saga,
the trilogy, yes.
which I guess has an autobiographical underpinning.
The story of the younger generation.
Okay. Well, I look forward to it, and I want to thank you so much for talking with us today.
Thank you, Paula.
And thank you for joining us today at the Drexel interview.